Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a deeply fascinating and honestly kind of unsettling boundary. We're talking about the absolute limits of human endurance and the stark, massive difference between a manufactured game and true, unrelenting survival. We humans have built a world for ourselves that is so insulated, so incredibly safe, that we actually go out of our way to seek extreme conditions just to feel the thrill of being alive. But what really happens when we strip away all those safety nets? Well, we're going to contrast extreme million-dollar YouTube survival challenges with the brutal, terrifying, and utterly unforgiving reality of a wild animal's life. We're going to see exactly what happens to the mind and body when suffering is just a choice versus when suffering is quite literally the only way to see another sunrise.
I want you to put yourself directly into a thought experiment for a second. Imagine you're trapped in a tiny, pitch-dark ice cave up in the Arctic. The bone-chilling cold is literally freezing every single cell in your body, and your toes have turned completely dead white. But then, you reach into your pocket and your fingers wrap around an emergency flare gun. You know for a fact that if you just pull that trigger, within minutes, a rescue team with warm blankets and hot cocoa is going to pull you out. Now hold that image in your mind, and contrast it with this scenario. You're a 5-month-old opossum in a pitch-black forest. A hungry fox is looming right over you, its sharp teeth are bared, and you can actually feel its hot breath on your neck. There is no rescue team coming. There is absolutely no flare gun.
That metaphorical flare gun, that represents the ultimate dividing line between a mental endurance game and the genuine, raw struggle for existence. We just love to simulate survival. We package suffering and we actually sell it for entertainment and money. Just think about those massive, viral extreme challenges on YouTube right now, like the ones hosted by creators like Mr. Beast. Millions of us tune in to watch people starve, freeze, and totally exhaust themselves for these massive cash prizes. I mean, it looks like survival, it certainly feels intense, but at its core, it is fundamentally a manufactured struggle. Let's look at one specific wild example. 11 YouTubers are challenged to keep their hands on the body of a private jet worth $2.5 million. The last person to take their hand off wins the entire jet. Now, from a purely physical standpoint, you're literally just standing there touching a piece of metal, right? So why is it so crushing? Why do people drop out one by one? It's because the organizers aren't attacking the contestants' muscles. They're systematically attacking their nervous systems. They use red tape to restrict the space around them. Instant claustrophobia. Then, to maximize that psychological pressure, they actually take the jet up into the air. When you add the constant vibration, the altitude changes, and the intense sleep deprivation, the brain's cortisol levels absolutely spike through the roof. Now, what's really fascinating about all this is how the human brain reacts to that sustained cortisol spike. Take a contestant named Will, for example. He resisted all this intense pressure for hours, standing strong for a chance at a $2.5 million jet. But the very moment he was offered a guaranteed $20,000 in cash, he took his hand off the jet in seconds. Why on earth would he do that? Well, it's a toxic combination of the sunk cost fallacy and a psychological phenomenon called decision fatigue. Under normal, everyday circumstances, your prefrontal cortex, that's the logical planning part of your brain, would easily calculate that a jet is worth way, way more than $20,000. But under extreme unyielding stress and severe sleep deprivation, that prefrontal cortex essentially just shuts down. So when that logical center goes offline, the older, more primitive parts of the brain completely seize control. And those primitive areas, they are desperate for a quick, guaranteed dopamine hit just to end the misery. Will's brain basically calculated that the ongoing, agonizing pain simply wasn't worth the highly uncertain odds of actually winning the jet. Quitting in these manufactured games is rarely, if ever, a physical failure, where the body just gives out. Instead, it's an economic choice. It's a choice executed by a deeply exhausted brain that is practically begging for relief. Let's shift gears for a minute and see how this exact dynamic plays out in a much more rugged environment. Consider a massive $500,000 wilderness survival challenge that pits a team of men against a team of women. The men's team enters the forest radiating this intense physical confidence and arrogance. They're bigger, they're stronger, and they are entirely certain that their sheer physical prowess is going to easily guarantee them that $500,000. But the women's team, on the other hand, takes a highly calculated, deeply strategic approach right from the very start.
When you really break it down, the reality becomes glaringly obvious. Physical strength is totally meaningless without a plan. Having massive muscles but zero resource management is basically like owning a multi-million-dollar Ferrari, but you've only got exactly 1 liter of gas in the tank. The moment a bear was spotted near the men's camp, a massive psychological shockwave hit them. Their cortisol spiked immediately, and because they had zero social structure or long-term strategy in place, they simply sat around, just hoping things would improve. As their incredibly limited calories burned away, their blood sugar plummeted, and you know what the very first casualty was? Their emotional regulation. They began to bicker, their teamwork completely disintegrated, and their entire camp collapsed under the sheer psychological weight of it all. In stark contrast, the women's team operated with the ruthless, cold efficiency of a Silicon Valley startup that's facing bankruptcy. They looked at their dwindling food supply, their runway, so to speak, and they made incredibly difficult sociological choices. They essentially implemented corporate layoffs out in the woods. On day 4, a team member named Hannah voluntarily quit. Now, she didn't pass out. She wasn't physically broken at all. It was a cold, calculated, totally emotionless sacrifice. By removing one person from the equation, she instantly extended the caloric runway for the remaining 4 members. They didn't act on emotion. They understood the brutal math that in survival, calories equal time. And this brilliant social strategy completely, absolutely overpowered the sheer physical strength of the men's team. But do these clever mental strategies actually hold up when the environment becomes truly lethal? Let's transition over to a grueling 7-day Arctic survival challenge. Now, this isn't just about managing your calories anymore. This is literally about your blood cells crystallizing. The contestants were trapped out in the snow and ice without even a tent. They had to dig ice caves with their bare hands, sleeping packed together like sardines just to share whatever body heat they had left. The physiological reality here is downright terrifying. Moisture and cold are the ultimate enemies. Without dry wood, you can't melt snow, which means you quickly suffer from extreme dehydration. And in the Arctic, dehydration is just as deadly as the freezing cold. They spent hours upon hours drilling through a frozen lake to catch fish, expending massive amounts of precious energy for absolutely 0 calories, which sent their bodies straight into catabolism. That's where the body literally begins to eat itself just to stay alive. During this absolute icy nightmare, a contestant named Chandler suffered such severe vasoconstriction that his toes turned completely, shockingly white. His body was literally pulling blood away from his extremities just to keep his vital organs functioning. I mean, he was one step away from permanent amputation. So the crucial point we have to ask is, how is this still just a mental game? Well, it all comes down to a fascinating psychological concept called the locus of control. Because Chandler and his team always had that metaphorical flare gun, the option to instantly quit and go home to safety, provided they shave their heads on the spot, their nervous systems actually process the physical pain differently. Knowing there is a definitive, guaranteed escape route triggers the human brain to release endorphins and natural opioids, which drastically increases your overall pain tolerance. Ultimately, they were not surviving, they were just enduring. True survival means you have absolutely no choice but to live or die. On day 5, when the Arctic team finally managed to catch 2 fish, the massive rush of dopamine gave them just enough energy to push through to day 7, where a warm dog sled came to whisk them safely away. It was incredibly painful, sure, but it was essentially a video game played on tutorial mode. You might take some heavy damage, but the game is programmed to never ever actually let you die. Now, we are going to strip that safety net away entirely. We're shifting away from the illusion of danger to the unforgiving, brutal reality of wild nature, where there are no emergency exits whatsoever. The life of an opossum in the wild is basically like a video game that's locked permanently on nightmare mode from the very first second of its existence. There are 0 extra lives here. There are no rescue crews waiting in the wings. Let's just walk through this relentless, devastating timeline. At birth, an opossum is practically a tiny, completely underdeveloped fetus. Along with up to a dozen scrambling siblings, it has to blindly race through its mother's fur in the pitch black just to reach the pouch. This is a literal race of death. If it slips, the mother doesn't stop to help, there is absolutely no empathy, no clever startup strategy. It will simply freeze to death right there on the cold ground. If it does survive, its jaw locks onto the mother so it isn't violently thrown off as she moves around. But right around 8 weeks, it inevitably falls off its mother's back. And once again, she doesn't even look back. From that exact moment on, it is entirely, completely alone in a deeply hostile world. At just 5 months old, it faces a fox. And this is where nature's defense mechanisms become truly, deeply terrifying.
You see, the opossum doesn't consciously decide to just play dead. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a total biological hijacking called tonic immobility. The parasympathetic nervous system completely overrides the animal's free will. Its muscles freeze totally solid, its heart rate plummets to barely anything, its mouth hangs wide open, and glands literally secrete the horrible stench of rotting meat. The crazy part? The opossum is fully conscious the entire time. It's trapped inside a paralyzed body, feeling the fox sniff it and even bite into it, unable to even blink an eye. It's a massive, desperate biological gamble, just hoping the predator loses interest in what seems like diseased carrion.
Let's say the opossum survives the fox, but nature's economy of calories is utterly merciless. As the opossum grows, it gets into a vicious mating fight and suffers a deep bite that leaves it with a permanent limp. Now, in the human world, a limp just means a few days resting up on the couch, maybe some ice. In the wild, a limp is a delayed death sentence. If an animal in the wild loses just 5% of its mobility, it requires a staggering 30% more energy just to forage for its basic daily food. It becomes an impossible, cascading biological equation.
Weakened by the huge caloric deficit of its limp, the opossum becomes an incredibly easy target. At 16 months, a massive horned owl strikes it right from the sky. The opossum fights fiercely, actually biting the owl's leg until it lets go. But the resulting fall completely severs the opossum's spine. Its hind legs are now permanently paralyzed. There are no veterinarians out there. There are no pitying camera crews to stop the clock. Driven only by a blind, dark instinct to just keep surviving, the opossum literally drags its paralyzed lower body through the dirt using only its front paws. Finally, at 20 months, while desperately searching for fallen fruit, a bobcat arrives. The opossum's biological paralysis kicks in way too late, and the bobcat swiftly snaps its neck. By morning, literally nothing remains but fur and bone. And this brilliantly illustrates the immense, almost incomprehensible gap between us and the natural world. We have built an incredible, impenetrable fortress around ourselves, a fortress woven tightly with antibiotics, perfectly climate-controlled supermarkets, and digital safety nets. We are so far removed from the bleeding edge of the food chain that we've completely lost touch with the true, dark survival codes that govern the entire rest of the planet.
We've somehow reached a point where we have to simulate starvation, intentionally freeze ourselves in ice caves, and stand around touching private jets until our brains literally shut down, all just to remember what it feels like to struggle. But we only do it because our hand is always hovering right near that flare gun. Nature, on the other hand, offers zero prizes. It offers no audience to cheer you on. It demands a relentless, agonizing struggle every single day, with the absolute only reward being the permission to wake up and suffer all over again tomorrow. Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling question to end this explainer on. Think about the opossum's nervous system for a second. A brutal, ancient biological code that paralyzed it just to keep it alive. If a true global catastrophe struck tomorrow, completely stripping away our grocery stores, our high-tech hospitals, and every single metaphorical flare gun we rely on, what would actually happen to us? Are those dark, wild survival instincts still sleeping deep within our DNA, ready to bypass our civilized minds when real death is actually on the line? Or have centuries of supreme, uninterrupted comfort wiped our hard drives completely clean, leaving us as nothing more than gymnasts, falling blindly toward the hard earth without a net? Definitely something to think about.